And with that, welcome inside our studios in this edition of Big Ten Today. Rick Pizzo, thrilled to be joined by Jake Butt. My man, it's been too long since we've done this.
Far too long.
I know it's been a while since you've done a spring as a college football player. When you think back to spring ball, spring practices, and finally getting to that spring game where you know that kind of spring grind is over, what do you think on?
As you mature, it's less of a big deal. But when you're a young guy, and nowadays, I was an early enrollee. Like nowadays, that's become completely normalized. Almost once you commit to a team, you want to get on campus.
So were you
early.
17 getting to campus?
I was 17 years old. I was 17 years old. Some of the veterans would like chew dip. I couldn't even buy dip at that point, you know. But it's first off, for these young guys, it's a great opportunity to experience the stadium and game day operations, get in front of the fans. And there's a saying in football, you don't make the team in spring, and that's true. But you earn opportunities. It's a starting point for how you enter fall camp. Spring is for building trust and earning opportunities.
Yeah, you really dated yourself. I don't think they use that term dip anymore. I don't really think anybody necessarily really does that. But
good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
All right, so your jam-packed Saturday football schedule looks like this. It is today's big story. The Nebraska, Maryland, and Rutgers games can all be seen right here. It's noon Eastern for the Huskers, then 6 p.m. for the Terps, 8 for the Scarlet Knights. That's here on the Linear Network. Oregon, UCLA also wrapping up their respective springs on Saturday afternoon. Certainly one of the more was last year as well, the arrival of Matt Rhule and what the Huskers would look like under a new head coach. Certainly had their moments in 2023, some ups, some downs. I think Rhule would tell you fell short of what he wanted from this team in year one. As we get set to start year two and evaluate this team after the spring, what's the first thing we should be looking at?
I just think about the context of Matt Rhule and as he turned around Temple and Baylor. It was the second year that the jump gets made. And, you know, that so much of that is coaching, and so much of what Nebraska needed was coaching, because I think the record kind of lies to us a little bit. The record's the record. You're judged on that. But I think they were a good team that lost games because they did what bad teams do, meaning the turnovers, the self-inflicted wounds. It has been the same story year after year after year. That defense under Tony White was phenomenal. I think 9 of their 12 games, they held the opponent to under 20 points. You should be winning a bunch of games if that's the case. And yet, the self-inflicted wounds, the turnovers, the mental errors is what killed them. So then I say that to say the first thing that I'll be watching, you'll be watching, Nebraska fans will be watching is the quarterback room. And it seems like from every report, Dylan Raiola, their true freshman, is far ahead mentally than what you would expect for a young guy. And usually with freshmen, it's not about the arm talent. Clearly he was a 5-star. He has the arm talent. It's about this up here. And as that applies to Nebraska's offense is, as a true freshman, can you avoid those mistakes that have plagued Nebraska? Spring game, he's going to get to go against this blitz-happy, exotic Tony White defense. I'm looking to him to see how he operates with the O-line, the receivers. Is he on the same page, and is he disciplined with the football? That's the key for Nebraska.
But I would also say this. Don't put too much into a freshman quarterback in a spring game. I remember calling the Penn State spring game when Drew Aller was brand new, bright-eyed, on campus. He looked awful. Threw 2 picks, should have thrown a third, and then we saw the progression throughout the summer, throughout the fall. And then suddenly, folks are saying, why isn't Drew Aller our starter? So I don't think you can judge Raiola on one go-round in the spring. I also think that fan base, knowing that last name and knowing that if you start to develop a freshman quarterback, what can happen to your team, they're going to want him in the starting lineup weekend one.
Well, we won't put a final stamp in judgment on him for sure, you know, but we will use it to just see where he's at.
We're going to evaluate.
And the value of the spring game versus spring ball is it's a game-type operation, and this is a thing that I think about when it comes to spring ball. So the way practice is structured for the other 14 practices is you have periods. So say you have a third down period. That's going to be a rack of 10 scripted plays. Raiola may get 4 or 5 of those plays. If you throw an interception on play 1, you don't feel the pain of that mistake. It's play 1, they slap you on the butt, you get back out there for 4 plays, right? If you make a mistake in the spring game, you throw an interception, you have to jog to the sideline, sit down, and it becomes much more effective in teaching young guys the cost of mistake or the benefit of making the right reads.
And your offensive teammates are mad because it means you're one step closer to having hot dogs when the defense gets to have steak, the post-spring game dinner. Okay, outside of the quarterback, where else should we be focused when we start to look at not the X's and O's, that's Matt Rule's job, but the Jimmies and the Joes? Because this team has had talent, but to your point, Jake, for whatever reason, those self-inflicted wounds have kind of outweighed the ability that we've seen on the field from this team to win more games than it should have been winning, not just under Matt Rule, but certainly under Scott Frost before him.
They have the formula, like the meat and potatoes of a successful team. I mean, some of the highest returning production across the board in the Big Ten. The O-line returns a ton of starters. I love their young weapons, Malachi Coleman, Jalen Lloyd, guys who were true freshmen last year that made some plays and can do some nice things. Again, those guys I'm excited to see. Can Tony White even progress on what happened last year? Right? And the key is there's no more East and West. So you're going to be going against different offenses than what the old West was. Can they progress and still hold opponents to under 20 points per game? Then if the offense improves, that's great. They return a ton of guys on the defensive side of the ball that had all Big Ten honors. And one guy I want to highlight, I think Nash Hutchmaker was the most underrated Big Ten defensive lineman last year. So he's a guy to keep an eye on.
He wrestled, by the way, for the Husker wrestling
He's a
team
beast.
this
He can do it
past
all.
winter. They were short at heavyweight. They said, number 0, get down on here. We can get you on the mat on the res leg. Did an unbelievable job, too. Wrestled some of the, not just the Big Tens, but the nation's best as well. Spring game comes your way, noon Eastern here on Big Ten Network, and you can see it live. We'll talk with Mike Locksley coming up in just a bit to get a lot more on Maryland. But listen, when it comes down to the Terps, the first question I'm going to ask Locks, the first question that everybody is going to ask if you're a fan of this team, what's life like after Leah? And who gets the quarterback job? And can whoever it is continue with this high-octane offense that Mike Locksley's been known for?
Yeah. It's funny because Locks was asked this question as everyone's going to ask him to open the spring, and he told the media, he was like, guys, stop asking me. I do not know. I do not have an answer. And I'd imagine all the reports are that is still the answer right now. This is.
So are you telling me I shouldn't ask him that as my first question?
Well, you can get away with things that other
8 or 9
You're
minutes.
Smooth.
All right,
yeah,
all right,
yeah.
I appreciate it.
You got great charisma. Okay, so is it Billy Edwards, a guy that had a ton of experience? You know, Talia was injured up and down throughout his career. He's come in and do some new things, but then they like MJ Morris from NC State. And what I'm hearing is MJ Morris, they're excited about his arm talent, his athleticism. Like, he checks all the box of a guy that could be a phenomenal quarterback, but it's up here. And that's the challenge with these transfer portal guys is you're learning a new system. You're building chemistry with your O-line and your weapons. How quickly can you learn? It sounds like he's still in the process of building a foundation. But for Maryland, we know with Locksley what this offense is going to be. They are reliant on good quarterback play. It's unlike Michigan, which is going to say, hey, we're relying on an O-line and run game. Of course, it all applies. Under Locksley, they need a guy that can distribute the ball out to their weapons, that can command the offense. That's what Talia did so well.
But they have weapons. I mean, Felton and Prather were two of the biggest play receivers in the Big Ten last year. Actually, Maryland was the only team, you would have thought Ohio State, the only team with 2 of the top 5 guys in terms of yards per catch. Felton and Prather were those 2 guys.
And that is exactly who Maryland is going to be. No defense feels great when you're lining up across from Locksley's offense. Like, they threaten you. Octavian Smith, I called their spring game last year, another guy to keep an eye on, takes the top off the defense. Preston Howard is a tight end to keep your eye on. He had a phenomenal game. He's a sophomore. So they have weapons. And yet, 3 new pieces across the offensive line.
Yeah, that's the big question, right?
So if you're going to have a new quarterback, you have to protect him. You have to give him time to distribute the ball. And then they got a deep running back room. So can they run the ball? It's so much of this is going to come right back to the offensive line.
I mean, Roman Hemby has the ability, if that offensive line plays well, he has the ability to have a monster season. But you have to have an offensive line in front of you to be able to run the football. I think, and I know Locks likes to throw it all around, he's as good designing offenses as anybody out there. This team's going to go as far as Roman Hemby takes it, I think. Absolutely. And he can catch the ball out of the backfield now. He's an improved blocker. I just think they're going to rely more on the run game in 2024 than they ever have before.
And a piece of this is putting it all together to create the big picture. The defense, particularly in the defensive front, they return a ton of experience. Like, that's something you can lean on. You also say, without the East and the West, Maryland is a team that's been right there, obviously a step behind Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State.
You think they may benefit?
I say that, and then I look at their schedule and I say, okay, you don't play Ohio State and Michigan this year, but you play Penn State, Oregon, and USC. I don't know that there's ever going to be a season where you feel great about your schedule. But
I don't know that they benefit, but I think there's a lot of teams in the West that we think this is going to hurt because teams like like Iowa's a great example, right? Everybody has said, well, Iowa has benefited more from the inequity of the East and West than any other team in the Big Ten, maybe any other team in college football with the inequity of divisions. That goes away. So maybe Maryland doesn't necessarily benefit, but maybe it doesn't hurt them quite as much as it hurts other teams. Also, you got to remember, this is a team now that is at a different level. Locks has gotten them to 3 consecutive bowl games. They've won all 3 of those games. He has not been shy about saying that's now the baseline. That's where we start. Everything else needs to go on top of that.
Absolutely.
And I think there's a similar story kind of being authored by Greg Schiano at Rutgers, right? When Schiano took over this program for the second time, it was not in a good spot. And yes, they have still struggled against the likes of the best, Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan. But against everybody else, Jake, they have not just been competitive. They've won games. They've sniffed bowl eligibility in other years. They've gotten there under Schiano again. This is a program that, again, time will tell as we go into the new look Big Ten, but Schiano has them back on that upward trend and the right trajectory.
They might have the largest momentum going into the Big Ten, into this season for everything you just mentioned. And really, they scared Ohio State. They were in that game.
Scared a lot of people last year.
There was self-inflicted. They could have easily won that game. They were in the game at Michigan before Mikey Sainristil intercepted and went on the 4th down play. So Schiano has taken this program and slowly built out the identity of who he wants this to be, which is let's have a run-first physical offense and let's play great defense. And you look at the context of spring ball and say the pieces are in play for them to do that once again. A ton of return in production on the defensive side of the ball. You have the Big Ten's leading rusher and Kyle Monungai back. You return a bunch of guys on the offensive line, and then it all comes back to quarterback, right? Is it Wimsatt, a guy that's certainly progressed, and I think he's valuable in the run game. He's a dangerous runner. Or are you going to look at Callie McManus, a guy that transfers in from Minnesota, where he played under Kirk Shiraka, your offensive coordinator? That's what I'm going to be watching this week, because I think the offense will look different if it's Wimsatt under center versus Callie McManus. But if they can get even average quarterback play from one of those guys, this is an extremely dangerous team.
And I think that's a situation where you say, well, guys have different skill sets. Both have experience. Both can win. Do you consider a dual threat quarterback kind of situation? With Schiano's background and his time in the NFL, I'm not sure he wants to be a guy who plays 2 quarterbacks unless he absolutely has to. I'm guessing he would prefer for one guy to emerge and say, we are going to run the style of offense that suits this quarterback best.
Sure, and really, if it's close, it'll be interesting to see what he values more. Does he value the legs of Wimsatt, even if, Callie McManus can't run it, or does he value the passing potential of a Callie McManus? They do have some new pieces in the receiver room. That's something to watch. Johnny Langan, their tight end, they're going to be replacing him. So, again, to me, it's going to come down to how he sees this offense and which guy best fits that mold.
It seemed like Johnny Langan might have been at Rutgers for like 11 years.
Yeah, he was there
7
forever.
different positions. I think he was coaching and playing at the same time. Rutgers does come off its first winning season, 7-6, first winning season in basically a decade. It was 9 full seasons, so now they head in to that 10th year, riding a wave of momentum. Realistically, in this new league, and remember, because of the schedule, there's 2 byes, so a lot of it depends on who you play, when you play them, when you have to make those West Coast road trips. What's success again? Is it just getting back to a bowl game, or does it actually have to build on what last year was and maybe reach that 8-win plateau, which in this league is going to be a really big ask?
I think each year is different, right? And for Rutgers, you look at this year, and they return a massive amount of production, leadership on both sides of the football. Their identity is intact. And in this new league, it's one of those years where stars have aligned. They avoid Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State on their schedule this year. So you have all this returning production. You're avoiding the big 3 that's been, your Achilles heel these past few years. You return the Big Ten's leading rusher and Monungai. If there's a year to get to 8 wins, it's this year. And then you say, can you build off that momentum in recruiting and start to make this more of the standard going forward?
I would also say this before we close on Rutgers. If there's a more underrated running back, a more underrated player maybe in the nation than Kyle Monungai, Jake, I'm not sure who it is.
And on the defense, Aaron Lewis too, right? This is a team that just gets overlooked by those that don't follow it closely. Yeah. This is a physical, excellent football team.
Yeah, I think Rutgers has a chance. I'm not sure 8 wins is in the cards with the schedule, but can they get back to a bowl game again for 2 consecutive?
Sure.
I don't see any reason why they can't have a winning record for 2 consecutive seasons.
Absolutely.
That we do have some developing news, just learning on Tuesday morning, and this is a little bit of a surprise to me. Brendan Sullivan, Northwestern quarterback, entering the transfer portal.
Yeah, and why?
I'm not sure.
You would have thought, I mean, he was the most experienced quarterback. You would have thought this guy is the run. So do they feel that there's someone
is he getting
that's
a vibe?
beating him out? That's the question.
Yeah, really interesting. Update you on this story as we get more from Evanston. But first, more spring storylines still to come. Jake returning in a bit with his take on what to watch for when 2 of the Big Ten's new West Coast editions take the field. But first, we locks it up. Maryland head coach Mike Locksley on Life After Leah. What's next after 3 straight bowl games and just how good this defense can be. Locks always looking good. He's with us in just a few minutes.